To pre-order or not to pre-order? That is the question that I hope to answer for this special discussion episode of the Bargain Game Hunter. So a question I was asked in one of my more recent videos is, what types of things do you recommend pre-ordering? And I thought that was a very interesting question because a lot of people have very differing responses when it comes to pre-orders. And I do admit that not every game needs to be pre-ordered. In fact, there are a number of which I think you should actively avoid pre-ordering, and we'll get to those. But I figured that I would take this time to kind of do a discussion where I share my suggestions and advice when it comes to what games I would recommend pre-ordering and what games you should actively avoid. I think that would be an interesting way to go about it. So we're going to start with my list of things that I think you should absolutely look into pre-ordering if you're interested. Now, remember that we're filming this in January of 2022. We're still dealing with a lot of the supply chain issues and things that have been caused by the pandemic of 2020. So supplies might be even more limited today than you would think. So just keep that in mind. But I think this advice still very much applies when it comes to things that you should and shouldn't pre-order. So, first thing that I would recommend pre-ordering, or at least looking into, JRPGs. Especially when it comes to JRPGs on the Nintendo Switch, but also the PS4. JRPGs are a genre of game that have a very dedicated fan base, but a lot of bigger outlets don't think of them as a mainstream, huge success. So a lot of JRPGs that do make it to the West don't get huge print runs just because a lot of companies don't think that they're going to be huge successes. So because of that, especially when it comes to the Switch, because the Switch is a little bit more, I wouldn't say niche, but a lot of times JRPGs are more demand on the Switch just because A, it's portable, and B, there's so many of them out in the wild. Not that there's a lack of PS4s either, but I feel a lot of times for JRPGs, because they're not incredibly graphically intensive, finding them on the Switch is super appealing. It seems like a lot of people, when it comes to these type of games, would prefer to play them on the Switch than on the PS4. So I would definitely recommend, if you see a JRPG from a publisher like NIS or Axis, you know, one of these more unique Japanese publishers, you might want to pre-order it just because finding one in the wild might be a little challenging. You still should be able to order them online, but if it's one that had a particularly small print run, you might have difficulty finding it in the future. So I would pre-order JRPGs, especially those you want to play on the Switch, just because those are going to be a little bit more demand than a lot of other games. So JRPG is definitely one that I would recommend pre-ordering if you see one you'll want. Next up, we have games from smaller publishers. This kind of goes hand in hand with my reasoning for JRPGs. There are a lot of publishers out there like the EAs and the Activisions and the Ubisofts. They're going to release their games. They're going to be pretty broad appeal. You're going to be able to find those in stock. When Call of Duty or Mass Effect goes in stock, you're going to find that game everywhere. Doesn't matter where you go. They might sell out briefly, but you're going to find that game no matter what. They're going to be everywhere. But when you find a smaller publisher that you might not have heard of before, and they're releasing a game, more than likely like a smaller indie title, that you're kind of interested in, that publisher might not have the marketing muscle that an EA or a 2K or an Activision have. So because of that, it might not be a bad idea to pre-order a game, especially if it's something you're interested in from a smaller publisher, because there might not be a huge print run in physical form of these games. So especially because of how big online sales are nowadays, I think a lot of these smaller publishers, they're releasing physical copies of their games, but they're not expecting the bunch of their sales to come from physical copies. So they don't release a ton of them. So if there's a particular smaller game from a smaller publisher that you want to pick up, it might not be a bad idea to pre-order it from your local game store. Next, of course, is special, limited, and collector's edition. So those are kind of a double-edged sword, because a lot of times when you look at a special edition or collector's edition or whatever edition you want, a lot of times there's nothing in them that is absolutely worth picking up. However, as of late, especially, some of these special editions can be worth a lot of money, especially in the future, if you're able to hold on to a sealed copy. And I think a lot of people have kind of jumped on that nowadays, so that they'll find a game that has a more obscure special edition and jack up to the price to the point where it's just not sustainable. So if you have a game that you're looking forward to and you really want to pick up a special edition of a game, it's probably a good idea to pre-order it. Now, I'm being very specific here. I'm not talking about like a day one edition, and I'm actually going to talk about that more on my games you shouldn't pre-order list. But I'm talking about a legitimate special edition that comes with a bunch of extras or a bunch of interesting stuff that you're not going to be able to find on regular editions. So it's probably a good idea to pick up, especially the more like lucrative collector's editions. Like, man, the Elden Ring one sold out almost immediately. So if you find a game like that you really want a special edition for, it's not the worst idea to pre-order it, to make sure you get one and don't have to worry about trying to battle the secondhand market to pay a ludicrous amount of money for something you could have paid significantly less for if you just pre-ordered it. And then the last one, and I feel this one is super obvious, limited run games. If you don't know who limited run games are, they're a game publisher who essentially take digital-only games and give them physical releases, but only in limited quantities. So when you go to Limited Run's website, they just have a list of products and they give you an option to pre-order those products. Now, usually you're not going to get that game for several months because they're a small company. They don't release nearly as many of these as you know, EA or Activision. On top of that, Limited Run, again, releases limited amounts of these. So these are kind of sought-after collector's edition type games. So if there is a game that you really loved and want a physical copy of that's available only on Limited Run, I would jump on it. Don't wait. Because Limited Run games, oftentimes, after they're released, skyrocket in price. I have 2 of them in my personal collection, which are Indigo Prophecy on the PS4. They actually released a physical copy of that. And then Stranger Things 3, the game, on PS4, which I found at a pawn shop. And both of those are worth a pretty good amount of money. They're not the most expensive limited run games, but there are some that are worth a ton. Now, you might get lucky because Limited Run does have a deal with Best Buy where they do release some of their more general print games in Best Buy stores. So sometimes you can find some older Limited Run games in store at Best Buy. But not every Best Buy is going to carry them, and they can be kind of tricky to find. So I would say when it comes to Limited Run games, if there is a game that you are particularly interested in and want a physical copy of it, pre-order it. It might take a while for it to come in, but it's going to be worth it in the long run. And that way you can pay retail for it rather than a potentially ridiculous secondhand price. So those are the recommendations I have in terms of games you should pre-order. Now here is my recommendation when it comes to stuff you should absolutely not pre-order. Because like I said, pre-ordering is kind of a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's absolutely worth it because you can secure a game that might be difficult to find later on. But there are other instances where you don't need to do it. So here are my recommendations for games you should not pre-order. First off, most big releases from major publishers. You don't need to pre-order Madden. You don't need to pre-order Call of Duty. You don't need to pre-order Grand Theft Auto. Those games are huge. Every store that carries video games will have those in stock. They're not going to sell out. There are tons of them. Don't stress about pre-ordering. That's all I gotta say. It's not worth spending the money to pre-order a game like that if you know it's gonna be easy to pick up. Now, oftentimes I pre-order a lot of my games, and the main reason why is because I do a lot of stuff with GameStop. Mostly I find games, I flip them for GameStop credit, and then use that GameStop credit to pick up games at GameStop. So if I'm already gonna pick up the game and I'm using GameStop credit, aka fun money, to pick it up, I'll still pre-order stuff. Like, I have Pokemon Legends Arceus pre-ordered. That's coming out later this week. Did I need to pre-order that? Probably not, but I want it. And that way I have a copy guaranteed. But is it a game I need to pre-order? No. They're going to have tons of them. It's a Pokemon game. You know it's going to be everywhere. So don't worry about mass-produced games from major publishers. They will be around. You don't have to look for them. Next up, Ubisoft. Now, I want to specifically point out Ubisoft because there's a trend with Ubisoft games. And I actually made a video about this last year. Actually, 2020. I made a video about this, and it's held true the last several years. Ubisoft games are notorious for going on sale very quickly after they release. Case in point, this holiday season, you could easily grab a game like Far Cry 6, Riders Republic, pretty much any of their new release games, Just Dance, were all discounted to at least half of their normal retail, sometimes even less. So if you wanted a Ubisoft game, you can find it pretty easily. It doesn't take much. So if it's a game you need to play immediately, then sure, pay full retail price. But the vast majority of Ubisoft games, give it a month. They'll go on sale. You don't have to pay full price for it. I wish I waited on like Riders Republic and Far Cry 6 because I could have got them for way cheaper if I waited. I did get them both cheaper than normal because I got them with credit, and then I think Far Cry got on a brief sale. But it went on sale for like 30 bucks later on in December. So if I waited a month, I could have got it for dirt cheap. So specifically Ubisoft games, hold off on pre-ordering because oftentimes you will find them for way cheaper than you think. Xbox first-party games. Now, there's a caveat with this one, and the main thing is Game Pass. Now, if you're an Xbox owner, you probably have Game Pass. It's probably the best value in gaming when it comes to a service. Basically, you pay $15 a month and you get access to a ton of brand new and classic games available on the service. They do take off titles and add titles pretty consistently. But one thing that is consistent are Xbox first-party titles. Any Microsoft first-party title will show up day one on Game Pass and is going to stay there pretty much the whole time. The only exception to this are the Forza games, just because of licensing issues, mostly with the music. They do remove like Forza Horizon and Forza Motorsport games, but it's usually years after they came out. So those, it might not be a bad idea to pick them up. But the nice thing is, by the time they're going to remove one of those games from the service, they've been out several years, so you can pick one up for cheap in the secondhand market. So I would avoid picking up first-party Xbox games in pre-orders just because Game Pass. You can play them for not free, but you won't have to pay extra for them. And if you want to pick up a physical copy, just wait till you find a really good sale. It's not like you're going to miss out on the game. It'll still be there. You can play it as long as you have Game Pass. So definitely recommend avoiding picking up Microsoft first-party games for pre-orders because you can find them cheaper and you can play them day one on Game Pass. And then last but certainly not least, we have Day One Edition. So Day One Editions are kind of a thing that tries to entice people to pre-order a game because you get extra content or a different cover art. And the main thing with a Day One Edition is pretty much every single time it's a scam because nothing included adds anything, and it's also not any kind of special edition whatsoever. I can't tell you how many times you can go to a store months, sometimes years after a game releases and still find the day one edition. Day one editions are super common. You don't need to pre-order one to make sure you get one. The content included is not good enough to make it worth pre-ordering. Hold out. If you really want that day one edition, you're going to be able to find it later on for way cheaper. Most stores keep carrying the day one edition long after the game came out. It's not hard to find them. So special editions, if it's a particularly interesting special edition, I do recommend pre-ordering, but day one editions, not worth it. Just wait, let the price go down. You'll still be able to find that version. Don't worry about it. So there you go. Those are my recommendations for games you should pre-order and games you should not pre-order. Hopefully that helps out. I do want to do a lot more kind of educational / instructional videos on this channel because I've learned a lot over the past couple years when it comes to game hunting. Game hunting is just as much about what you know as opposed to actually going out into the world and doing it yourself. So I think it would be helpful to do kind of a tips and tricks style like informational series. And I may have one planned. I'm actually trying to get some people on board to help me do it. So stay tuned. You might see more stuff like that. But if there's something like this, which doesn't really fit in that mold, I'll try to do videos like this so people can enjoy them. So if you have any other big questions about game hunting or something you would like to know more information on, let me know in the comments. I love interacting with everybody. This video is actually inspired by a comment who suggested that I do a video like this. So if you want to see more stuff like this, let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to give my suggestions based on the experience that I have game hunting. And if I'm not an expert on it, I'll try to point you to a channel that is. So we got to help out each other, right? That's the goal. So that's going to do it for this little episode of the Bargain Game Hunter. Thank you for watching. I know we didn't do any game hunting, but I think the tips that we learned today will help you in your game hunting journey. So I still think it's a win. Anyway, if you're new around here, be sure to hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell. That way you know when new videos drop. And I will see you on the next episode of the Bargain Game Hunter. Bye-bye.